पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीं या ब्रह्मेन्द्रवरुण यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुदस्तुन्यन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः देवैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदेर्गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः. Good evening. So we are continuing the 7th chapter. We discussed the 3rd verse of the 7th chapter last time, that is Jnana Vijnana Yoga. And in this 3rd verse, Lord Krishna says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhaye yatadamapi siddhanam kaschit mam veti tattvataha. It's a universal fact. In essence, what it means is this. Not many people go for higher spiritual values. Only a small percentage of people will have the inclination to think about what lies beyond today, what I see just now. Because every moment we are experiencing various things in this world, and in front of us we see things happening. And there are certain incidents that may make us think of something beyond the present, beyond the today, the empirical. But that doesn't last for long. Immediately we forget, and then we come back to the ordinary empirical plane. In fact, this particular phenomenon is called Maya in Vedanta. It's a very interesting word. Maya has got many meanings that we are going to discuss today. In fact, it comes in one of these texts here. Maya is, in fact, the unknown, the imponderable, the indescribable, something that is very real in our everyday empirical life. But we know that it is not eternal, but we cannot deny it. Now this is a great paradox in our life. So in this particular 7th chapter, Lord Krishna talks about this interesting phenomenon, Maya. That is a very philosophical approach that we are going to discuss after a few more verses. But in this particular context, in the context of 3rd verse, where Lord Krishna says, only a tiny percent of the people in the world can think of what lies beyond. In fact, that ability to ask that question is the beginning of the higher evolution of human beings. An evolution that takes place not at the biological, at the physical level, but the level of the ideas, experiences. And we call it mysticism, we call it philosophy in the higher sense of philosophy. We call it a philosophy with a transcendental emphasis. So, but the point is, frequently we are not allowed to take a pause and think Well, what's the meaning of life? What's the mystery of human experiences? Is it all that we see around us permanent? What lies beyond the impermanent? The ability to ask this question is also the beginning of modern science at a different level, at the level of the external world. But in its philosophical and spiritual aspects, this question helps us to evolve at the level of spiritual awareness. But it doesn't happen to many. It will happen to everyone. That's what Vedanta says. If not in this life, maybe just after a few thousands of years. So that is the greatness of Hindu religious tradition. The law of karma and the reincarnation. Frequently people ask this question when we talk about Buddha or Shankaracharya or Christ. People ask this question, why can't we have right now there? In fact, this emphasis for today and now. It's okay in science and technology. You should straight away start. But in the field of spirituality, it is not always our option. It is not always our choice. It is where we stand in the ladder of evolution. So we can all become Buddhas. And that's what Vivekananda says. We should all become Buddhas. Vivekananda says, we have the potential to become Buddhas. That's why, each soul is potentially divine. And the goal is to manifest that divinity. There are many ways, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, means the path of selfless action, the path of concentration, the path of spiritual, intellectual self-analysis, and the path of devotion. There are many, many ways of starting this evolution. And if not now, maybe after a few thousands of life cycles further, we can reach that goal. But the point is, it may not happen to everyone at the same time, and frequently we need some hard knocks on our head, knocks from what we call destiny or fate. We work hard for something with the full conviction that we will succeed, and then we find we do not succeed. There is no earthly explanation. There is no empirical explanation. There is no logical explanation as to why we fail. But we fail. You help a person to the best of your ability, do everything possible. Now naturally, if you apply the logic of science or the logic of mathematics, 2 plus 2 together should be 4, nothing less, nothing more. But in real life, that logic doesn't operate. You go on helping a person, do everything possible, but the person's reaction is totally different. He becomes your worst enemy. On the other hand, you don't do anything to anyone, and that person may be your best friend. So where is the logic of mathematics and logic of physics? Doesn't apply here. So this unique experience of the great imponderable, the unknown, the inexplicable, the indescribable, the non-definable, that may make us think, well, what's the real meaning of life? And that's the beginning of spiritual evolution. It's not that you bow down before an almighty, a strong, muscular, a Hulk who creates this world and who has keeping an eye on us, on our activities, ready to punish and ready to reward. It is easy to put our faith in such a person. That is easy. You can find that in Hinduism, in all traditions you find. Because people do not really want freedom. People really want slavery. In politics we want freedom. We want social freedom, economic freedom, political freedom, but we don't want spiritual freedom. We want spiritual slavery. That's why some religions, the definition itself is slavery, surrender. But Vedanta actually is the other way around. And Sri Krishna tells you here, the quest for spiritual freedom, that ability to ask question as to what lies beyond, what's the meaning of life, that's the door that opens to freedom. That's the beginning of the road to freedom, spiritual freedom. That is not what people want, because they want slavery in spirituality and they want freedom in politics. So you can find Sahasranam Manushyanam Sahasreshu Kaschit Yadadi Siddhaye. Siddhi means spiritual enlightenment, like the state of Buddhahood, you may call it. So Manushyanam Sahasreshu, among thousands of human beings, Kaschit means maybe one person, maybe two persons. Of thousands, maybe one may strive for this siddhi, for the spiritual enlightenment. And yatatam abhisiddhanam kaschid mam veti tattvataha. Among those who make an attempt, only a tiny percentage actually reach the goal. It's a very grand statement. And then in the next verse that we already discussed, Bhumirabo analo vayu kammana buddhirevacha ahankara iti yamme bhinna prakritihi ashtatha. And the next verse is apareyamitastu anyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhudam mahabaho yedam dharite jagat. We finished these two verses just to recuperate, just to take stock of, to remind ourselves. So Lord Krishna is trying to analyze existence, and he divides existence into two categories. Remember, these categories are not eternally distinct and different from each other, because the ultimate goal is to see the divine in everything and everywhere, and to see everything in divine. So, but then at the beginning of our analysis, taking a clue from Sankhya philosophy, Lord Krishna says, first of all, there is this Apara prakriti, made up of 5 elements in the subtle form. It's called Pancha Tanmatras. That is Apaha, Analaha, Vayu, Kham, Manah, Buddhi, Evacha. So, first of all, earth, Bhumi means matter, earth. Bhumi Apa means the water principle. Anala means Agni, the fire principle. And then Vayu, the air principle. And Kham, the space principle. We already discussed, it's called Akasha. Plus Mana, Buddhi and Ahankara. Mind, intellect and the ego principle. These 8 elements constitute what we call lower nature. It is called Apara prakriti. Apara means that which is not supreme, that which is, in short, it is called Achit. It is the opposite of consciousness. It is unconscious, and it is something that we all discuss in modern science, modern technology, in all empirical sciences. We discuss this Apara prakriti. Then in the next verse, Lord Krishna mentions Para prakriti. What is Para prakriti? The supreme. And the supreme nature is something that is present in everything, the divine spark that gives essence to everything. We may call the immanent spiritual reality, the immanent divine spark that is present in everything. That is, Jiva Bhudam is mentioned here. It is consciousness itself. It is called Kshetram, the immanent divine principle, and the Apara prakriti is called Kshetram, the field. And up to this we have already discussed. Next verse is that we are going to discuss today is the 6th one. Edad yodini bhudani sarvani iti upadharaya aham krishnasya jagada prabhava pralayasthatha. What this verse tells us is, these two prakritis, natures, constitute the point of origin of all beings in this world. And I am the origin and dissolution of all these. The entire creation comes from me. What is the meaning of I here? I, according to Vedanta, is Atman, the all-pervading divine reality that is present everywhere. So in short, every human being is nothing but a combination, a mixture of consciousness and its opposite. Every human being is a mixture of consciousness and the non-conscious reality, the conscious and the unconscious. It is technically called Chit Jada Granthi, means a bundle, a mechanism that contains in it both the conscious and also the unconscious. The conscious is the divine spark. We discussed this earlier. If a human being passes away, something that made him active, something that made him a living human being, that enabled him to live, breathe, eat food and do things, that divine spark which is present in him as the indweller, the immanent reality, that suddenly departs. So that divine spark is the conscious, the para prakriti. And that is an aspect of the all-pervading spiritual truth, Brahman or Atman we call. That's the idea behind. Now one may very well ask this question, what about our faith? Frequently this question will arise because normally we go to temples, we go to churches, we may go to synagogues, we go to Buddhist temples, we go to different places of worship, and we read books in which we read about God, His kindness, His compassion, and stories, parables in Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, everywhere you find. So what about that aspect of a monotheistic Godhead? This should be understood because frequently that's the idea we have in mind. A God who creates this world, listens to our prayers. Vedanta says that concept is correct, absolutely right. But as we evolve in our spiritual life, as we go beyond world awareness, the level of world awareness, then our understanding of the divine reality also progresses. It graduates into another level. And then, not rejecting this idea of a monotheistic God, we get a higher and more universal scientific idea of Godhead. And at that level we understand the highest idea, the highest understanding of God is one supreme divine reality that is present in everything, that is present everywhere. Now Lord Krishna is going to tell you that this divine reality is present in everyone, in everything. And this divine reality is present in the good and also in the bad. So one will have problems with this, What is the essence of this divine reality? It is the essential totality of all existence. So, in fact, Lord Krishna is going to tell you in the coming verses, this divine spark is present in the mountains, in the valleys, in holy rivers, in majestic oceans, in the majesty and beauty and charm and splendor of everything in this world. You are finding an expression of this divine reality. That's how this particular chapter progresses in its initial stages. So you find in the 7th verse, Matta paradaram na nit kinjidasti dhananjaya mai sarvamidam prodam sutre Manigana Iva. This is a very, very famous verse which has a beautiful metaphor in it. What it says is, Lord Krishna says, Matta paradaram na anyat. There is nothing beyond me. There is nothing that is beyond me, and there is nothing that is distinct from me, that is eternally different from me. And everything in this world is nothing but so many jewels which are strung as a row on a thread. And the thread and everything in this world, all the living beings, whatever we are going to discuss in the coming verses, you find Belavadamasmi, the strength of the strong, and then the beautiful smell of the earth, and the sapidity, the taste of waters, the height of mountains, the beauty of a forest, the majesty of the ocean. All these are different expressions of this one supreme reality. Now, here you can find Shankaracharya has written some very wonderful explanations to drive home this idea, this 7th verse. So he says, Dirgha Tantu Padavat Sutre Manigana Iva. That's a very famous verse. Dirgha Tantu means a long thread. Pada means cloth. Now, what is the role of long threads which constitute a piece of cloth? The cloth and the threads out of which this cloth is made are not two different entities. You remove all these threads and you don't have a cloth. And that is one important metaphor. Now, here the question is the sutra, the thread, different from the jewels which are strung in the threads? You need a thread, and then you may need jewels to string together to make a garland, maybe a necklace, an ornament. Or you need a thread and then you need flowers to make a garland of flowers. These are two different things. But in this context, at the beginning of our spiritual evolution, we think, naturally we believe that the Lord, the Almighty God, is a universal, unifying, harmonizing thread that puts together all the different entities in this creation. This is one interpretation. Actually, this is the interpretation of a great Indian non-Advaitic Vedanta called Ramanuja. Ramanuja says, Antaryami. Antaryami means the divine reality as an indweller present in everything. That is the view of Visishta Advaitins. And Advaitins say, actually, the thread is made of the same jewel which constitute the ornament. So, according to Advaitins, the creation and creator are the same. But this again I should just emphasize again, this is not a philosophical construct. It's a matter of our spiritual evolution. At the beginning we believe God is present in us. As you evolve, you find God is not something present in us. God is the one which is my very essence. Not that every human being is God, not at all. In fact, there is a verse that is coming later which actually rejects this possible misunderstanding. Very often, there is a classical misunderstanding. Advaita is terribly misunderstood. Often it is hijacked by unfortunately by many of these misinterpreters. Advaita says that you are God, I am God, this table is God, or the elephant is God, and often they point out the elephant God images in the temples. There are different deities with very strange forms and shapes and sizes. So frequently, those who do not understand this higher Advaita philosophy, of course, it's not their fault, because Hinduism is not a religion with a single founder. It gradually evolved from the lowest levels of atheism, agnosticism, and eventually to the highest spiritual idealism or monism, so to speak. So what it says is, everything in this world is able to exist, and the essence of its existence is not separate and distinct from this divine reality that is present everywhere. So that is an important point, remember. Now this again is a matter of our mystical experience. Little bit of that you may get in the works of the 13th century German mystic Meister Eckhart, who actually dared to cross the threshold of monotheism, and of course he had to pay a terrible price for it. He was called to Rome, and on the way he disappeared. He was a Dominican monk who lived almost 450 years after Shankaracharya. And many of his statements, when he discusses the Godhead, which that goes beyond the Trinity, the absolute reality that even cannot be called God, to claim to define God in so many terms itself is a blasphemy. To that extent, Meister Eckhart goes. Almost you can find all these ideas, surprisingly, you find seem to be I don't say taken from, but very similar to the statements in Shankaracharya's Bhashya, which was written 450 years before Eckhart. So according to this view, it's called Satkaryavada, which means the effect and the cause are the same. It's just like, let's say, gold and golden ornaments. You cannot take gold out of golden ornaments. Then you will lose you will lose gold and also the ornaments. You cannot take all the threads from a cloth. Then there will be no cloth. So according to these Advaita Vedantins, the cause and effect are not actually two different entities. The effect, they call karyam in Sanskrit, is already pre-existing in cause, is karana. So it's called Satkaryavada, which means the karya exists as a reality, as a sat in karana. It's called Satkaryavada. These are all some of the important views that developed in Indian philosophy. And this Satkaryavada has got two aspects. One is the philosophy of parinama, evolution, which says that effect pre-exists in cause, but when effect comes into existence, it becomes something different. This is a complete change. It's called Parinamavada, the doctrine of real transformation in English, so to speak. The other one is the doctrine of apparent transformation. It's called Vivartavada according to Advaitis, which says that God Himself is present in everything, and not only that, everything in this world, in the highest sense or at the highest level of our spiritual awareness, is non-different, non-distinct from God Himself. I mean Brahman itself, that's the idea. So, now here is a verse in this particular 7th verse which I discussed. Matta parataram na anyat kinchid asti dhananjaya mai sarvam idam prodam, mai sarvam idam. Idam means everything that you experience, you see, you hear, you smell, you interact with, everything that you can conceive of, everything that you come in contact with, using mind and the 5 senses of perception and the 5 senses of action. The eyes, the ear, the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of smell, sense of touch, sense of taste. All these are five senses of perception, and also the five senses of action. And mind is called 11 senses of perception. All that you perceive using these 11 senses of perception is constitute the meaning of either means this. So you can find there is a particular word. All this is strung together on this thread, like jewels strung together on a thread to form a necklace. Like that, whatever you experience using the mind or intelligence or any senses of perception, all these constitute the reality, which is like a ornament made of jewels strung together in a thread. In fact, this is the great definition you find in a classical Vedantic text called Panchadasi. This means Ekadashair Indriyai Yuktya Shastrena Abhi Abhagamyade Yava Kinjit Bhavededam Idam Shabdodidam Jagat. So whatever you experience, whatever you see, whatever you feel, whatever you interact with, all these which we perceive, understand using 11 senses. So mind is also considered to be a sense, and along with the other 10 senses together constitute the instruments by which we create our own world around us that we see and interact with. All these constitute a thread and jewels which are strung together on that thread, constituting an ornament. It's a very famous verse quoted by many scholars to emphasize the Advaitic oneness or unity of existence. Beautiful verse. Then that idea is further expanded in the coming verses. Rasoham apsu kaunteya prabhasmi shashisuriyoho pranava sarvavedeshu shabdakhe paurisham nrishu. So this aham rasa means sapidity, taste of waters. There is every entity in this world has something which makes it what it is. This you can find among human beings also. That's we are going to. Every entity in this world has something in it which makes it what it is, which gives it its identity. So here, Rasoham apsu kaunteya. Sapidity is that essence in waters, that I am. Who is the I? Atman. Here Lord Krishna is not pointing out to himself as the son of his parents Vasudeva and Devaki, his parents. He is not referring to himself as a human being. He is referring to himself as the divine spark present everywhere. So, Pranava Sarvavedeshu Shabdakhe Paurisham Nrishu. Again, I am the radiance, the effulgence in the moon and the sun. And then Pranavaha Sarvavedeshu. Pranava means Om, which A, U, Ma, which constitute Om. Of course, there is just an analysis. We should not get away with the impression that Om contains all these. This is one way of analyzing Om, which is pronounced as Pluta, for Omkara Upasana in the Mandukya tradition. And that Om constitutes the essence of all the Vedas. Vedas here means knowledge. Om actually is nothing, the symbol of all that exists. The whole reality is implied, the totality of reality. Not the numerical totality, but the essential totality of the whole existence is embedded, is implied by the word Om. There is a big description of this philosophical idea in the Mandukya Upanishad. Those of you who are interested can view my classes on Shankaracharya's Bhashya on the Gaudapada and Mandukya Upanishad later. Then Shabdakhe Paurisham Nrishu. Again, I am the sound in Akasha. So sound is the symbol of space. And then Paurisham Nrishu. Among men, manliness, so to speak. Among women, womanliness. What it means is, every person, every entity, every living organism as its essence which constitutes its identity. You remove it, it's gone. That essence is an expression of this divine reality that is present in everything and that is present everywhere. And this continues, Punyo Gandha Prithiviyamcha Tejaschasmi Vibhavasu Jivanam Sarabhudeshu Tapaschasmi Tapasvishu. And I am the sweet fragrance in earth. Earth as its own Gandhavati Prithivi, that is the definition in Indian philosophy. The essence of earth is its a raw smell which comes out of it. That's why, and the brilliance in fire, Tejas Chasmi Vibhavasu, and the fire and the brilliance that essentially constitutes the essence, the essential characteristic of fire. And then Jivanam Sarvabhudeshu, and the life in all beings. What constitutes the essence of life in all beings? That is again this divine reality. Again, I am the austerity among the ascetics. Tapaschasmi Tapasvishu. Those who practice austerity, those who take different vows and practices the spiritual disciplines, that's what constitutes their life ideal. That what actually makes them ascetics. That ability to practice asceticism of the ascetics and the ability to practice austerities of those who practice austerities is an expression of the divine. It's a very philosophical definition. It is easy for us to say God is the goodness of all. That is simple. Now there is a philosophical and psychological mystery behind. Lord Krishna could have simply told us, "I am the essence of everything." That's the reality. But instead of saying that, Lord Krishna, maybe after hinting that idea in the earlier verses, now Lord Krishna says, is a very descriptive explanation of what this means. The great good qualities, the great characteristics found in everyone, which constitute the identity of that person, that is an expression of this divine reality present in everything, everywhere. Of course, there are some interesting sub-commentaries where they mention, well, let us say, suppose a person tells, well, I'm strong, I can do anything. Let's say a man like Napoleon. Of course, we should try to explain this in the light of living human beings the world has produced. A man like Napoleon was arguably one of the greatest military geniuses the world has produced. Or Hannibal, who defeated Romans 4 times in the Second Punic War. Now, when it comes to certain unique qualities which we consider genius, there cannot be a greater general than Hannibal, with his ragstaff, ill-trained, ill-disciplined, very backward soldiers, he defeated the most powerful military machine of 3rd century BC in the Second Punic War. In 4 consecutive wars, he almost destroyed Rome. A single man. Roman's army was so well trained, well disciplined. Napoleon's army was much superior to those who had to fight with. We had the best cavalry, the best artillery, and he himself was the greatest military genius of his times. But you look at what happened to them. All these superlative qualities failed at some point, which shows that even the strongest and best have within them what we may call the Achilles heel, the seed of his own downfall. Now, we remember them for their achievements, but we also remember them for their downfall. You cannot think of Napoleon without remembering Waterloo. You cannot think of Hannibal without the complete destruction of Carthage by Romans, Africanus. After Carthaginians were defeated, entire Carthage was wiped out. So there is decline and fall of Roman Empire. There is a rise, there is a fall. But you think of a man like Buddha, a man like Christ, a man like Shankaracharya, a man like Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, a man like, let's say, even Meister Eckhart, whom we referred to just now, or the great geniuses, spiritual geniuses. As time rolls on, their stature continues rising, becoming greater and greater. But in the cases of other great men and women who achieved great things in this world, they had an uphill and a downhill. There is the high tide and a low tide also. But there are certain persons who could transcend and go beyond empirical, who somehow or other they realize the presence of something unique, something transcendental, something permanent, something spiritual within themselves. In that category you may include a person like Buddha or a Christ or Shankara or Sri Ramakrishna, or any of these great men and women, Saint Teresa of Avila, anyone in any tradition you find. So the point is, even in the greatness of the great, in the empirical sense, there is hiding within those persons their own Achilles heel, the seed of their own downfall. But those who realize the limitation of the empirical, they connect with the fact, they realize the fact, well, all these powers come from a higher source. When you realize that reality, then you become a spiritual person. That's why we remember Christ. We remember Buddha. That's an important thing to remember. That's what is stated in the 11th verse. Before that, the 10th verse. Bijam mam sarvabhudanam vidhi partha sanatanam buddhir buddhimatam asmi tejas tejasvinamaham. So Lord Krishna says, I am the eternal seed of all beings. I am the intellect of the intellect. I am the heroism of the heroic. Next one is Belam Belavadamasmi Kama Raga Vivarjidam Dharma Aviruddho Bhudeshu Kamosmi Bharadashabha. Of the strong and the strength devoid of desire and attachment. That's an important point. If a person is strong, but if he's also free from desire, then he has a spark of divinity in him. If a person who is strong, powerful and full of desire, then there is so much less of the spark of divinity in that person. That's why Lord Krishna says, Belam Bilavadamasmi Kama Raga Vivarchitam. And the strength among the strong, a strength that is devoid of desire and attachment. So strength as goodness means, or greatness means strength and renunciation, strength and non-attachment. If a person is very rich, but he is not greedy, he is not attached to his wealth, then he is a really great man. If a man is very strong, but is not proud of his strength, he uses it, but not proud of his strength, not tainted by desire and attachment, then becomes. That's why Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi made a statement. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna also makes such a statement. Persons of high achievements, who are also men and women of renunciation, they belong to a class by themselves. If you are a very rich person, you are totally non-attached to money, there is a spark of greatness in us. In fact, that's precisely what Lincoln says. Any man can stand adversity, but if you want to test the character of a man, you give him power. Because if a person also displays the power, the grandeur of renunciation and non-attachment, at the same time he has the power, there is greatness and goodness. That's why Lord Krishna says, Belam belavatam asmi, kama raga vivarchitam. Strength of the strong will not be a good quality unless that strength is combined, is reinforced or enriched by qualities like renunciation, non-attachment. That's why. So everything can have a spiritual dimension, spiritual orientation, when it mixes with these unique spiritual qualities. Dharma aviruddho bhudeshu kamosmi bharadashapha. Now, I am desire, and then another point, I am desire in all beings, Dharma aviruddho bhudeshu. Dharma aviruddha kama means a kama desire which is not opposed, otherwise it is unopposed to dharma. Person has desire, but the desire is to do something good for others, good for himself, good for the whole world. That desire is a spark of this divine. Like the strength of a strong person who has no desire, no selfish desire, and absolutely non-attached, who is a man of renunciation, is also strong. That person is great. Again, a person who has a desire, but that desire is not opposed to the fundamental virtues, spiritual qualities, is not opposed to dharma. That person has something in him. That's why Shankaracharya says, Kama raga vivarjitaha, Kama trishna asakti krishneshu, vastushu ragas rajjita prapteshu vishayeshu. So Shankaracharya, with this threadbare analysis, he distinguishes this. He says kama means, a Sanskrit word, is desire for what is absent. You don't have money, you want money. That is called kama. And raga is attachment, affection for what is already obtained. So this is the important, it's a very, very famous verse that you can find here. Of course, there is a great, in Shankaracharya's own words, he gives a beautiful description of what happens to a person in spite of having all other qualities. If that person has got this desire which is not unopposed to dharma, which means a desire which is adharmic, which doesn't care for dharmic values, a desire which is selfish, person who has a strong desire to achieve something but doesn't care for any values. That kind of desire can be the door to one's own destruction. There's a very, very famous verse that comes in this Viveka Chudamani, which is a small introductory work written by Shankaracharya in verses. So there is an interesting, he gives an example of how this desire, which is not for himself or good for others, a desire which is which may make him greedy, which may make him selfish, which may make him evil, how that desire slowly brings one's own destruction. So give the example. Suppose you throw a ball from the top of a ladder. The ball will hit the first step, second step, third step, and it won't stop till it hits the bottom, the ground floor. So there's a Lakshachudam ched yadi chittameshat Behrimukham sannibade tatastataha pramadata prachuda kelikantukaha sopana panktu patito yatha tatha. It's a very, how this desire can become poison for human mind and the hidden dangers of this desire. Again, the desire that Shankaracharya is speaking about, the desire for doing evil things, the desire for greed, for doing things which are not good for others. So that kind of desire acts like a poison and the hidden dangers. And also, it brings one's own destruction. Remember one thing, Vedanta doesn't oppose sublime desires. That's an important point. We may ask the question, can we live in this world without desire, without ambition? We cannot live. But we can live, we certainly can live, we are able to live without selfish desire. Without overwhelming selfishness, we can live. Extreme greed, we can certainly avoid. But we may require some kind of a desire. That's why he says, Belam Belavadamasmi Kamaraga Vivarjidam Dharma Viruddho Bhudeshu Kamosmi Bharadashava. So a desire which is not opposed to Dharma, a desire which upholds Dharma, a desire which upholds higher values, that desire is not bad. It is becomes a quality. It is the root of all creativity. All great achievements in this world were accomplished by persons who were inspired by the sublimity of their desire. And that desire comes from God. It is something divine. It is something spiritual because it makes us good and great. So we should always remember, good desire, higher desire, sublime desire which promotes creativity is not what is meant here, but desire that becomes possessiveness, selfishness, greed. That desire becomes the door opening to our own downfall. That's why Lord Shankaracharya gives the example of this evil desire, which actually becomes the cause of our own downfall, like a ball that is thrown down a ladder which doesn't stop, a staircase actually, which doesn't stop till the ball reaches the bottom of the staircase. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. It will be helpful in your case. Yeah.
Swamiji, one.
Yeah, most welcome.
Swamiji, the
yeah.
About passion, about the passion with people which is unopposed to desire, which is unopposed to one own
So clear.
Duty, dharma.
Can you make it clear? Sound not very clear. Your voice is not
Can,
clear.
can you hear me?
Now better.
Harsh, can you? Oh, this is too much echo.
You can
Somebody,
write. You can write, and somebody can read. In fact, if you want.
That's what I was going to expect.
so I'll write it.
Yeah. They will read it out to me. Yeah.
My only said Swamiji, the only to last desire explained that was the dharma, right?
They are writing the question. That question. But, can you repeat once more?
Swamiji, last point you mentioned that was dharma, right?
So dharma.
Yes, Swamiji, passion without passion or desire for unopposed to duty or dharma.
Oh, yeah. In the 11th verse, Lord Krishna said, "Belam belavadam asmi, kama raga vivarjidam." The strength of strong people, that strength which is devoid of desire and attachment, that is good. At the same time, in the next, Lord Krishna says, dharma aviruddha means dharma aviruddha kama. Kama here means desire again. Of course, that kama is actually a desire to achieve things that you don't already have. That desire, which is not opposed to dharma. That desire which promotes dharma, which actually urges you to do good things, creativity, because you need, let's say you have a sublime goal to achieve, a great thing you want to do, and you direct all your energies, your time, your resources towards accomplishing that goal. For that you have a desire, you do that. That desire is also a divine spark coming from God. It's a gift from God. That's the idea behind. That is one thing. In the earlier portion, that karma, I mean that the desire which a strong man should not have, that desire is selfish desire. So there are two desires mentioned here. The strength of the strong who have no desire, means who have no selfishness, no evil desire. That is a divine gift. And again, a desire, a sublime desire, a higher desire, a desire to do something noble, something sublime. That is also a gift from God. So apparently there is no contradiction. In other words, if you have strength, but no evil desire, no bad desire, no worldly desire, then it is greatness. It is a divine spark. On the other hand, if you have got desire which actually helps you to do great things, let us say great scientist, somebody who starts a project for helping other people, that is certainly good. That is actually a divine gift. That's the idea behind. Two types of desires. The one is the desire that is opposed to dharma. That a strong person should not have. And a desire that is not opposed to dharma. A desire that promotes creativity, that inspires you to do great things. That desire is something sublime, something wonderful. It is a gift from God. It is an expression of the divine. That's the idea behind. Actually, without people who had this higher desire, this world would, whatever good things the world has received, this thing would not have happened. All that have made this world good and great in whatever way, is the result of some people who have some higher sublime desire, wanted to do great things, wanted to create great things. A man like Vivekananda, he didn't really want to come to America, but then he got some divine message as he understood it. That's what means. And some people told him, so he came. So he wanted to proclaim Vedanta. A man like Christ, man like Buddha, anyone, even you can find today's world great philanthropists. I cannot mention names, not proper to mention names. Great philanthropists who have big projects for helping people affected by diseases, or not pandemic necessarily, but those who have big projects, those who spend money on big projects to help people suffering from diseases and natural calamities. It's a great desire. Maybe they wanted to do these things. That desire is an expression of the divine. They may not be aware of it, but it's coming from the source is the divine spark. That's the idea behind. Yeah.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you. In modern time, let us say somebody who devotes a lot of time to develop a vaccine for the pandemic, let us say. That's a great desire, an example of that. It's an example. You want to contribute a huge amount to develop vaccine, cheap and effective vaccine. It's a great desire. That's why, he says, dharma aviruddho bhudeshu kama. Kama means desire, sublime desire, which is not opposed to dharma, rather which promotes dharma, which inspires dharma, ideal. That is an expression of the divine. So actually, Lord Krishna is explaining the simple fact that wherever you find greatness, nobility, goodness, they constitute a spark from the divine. That's the idea behind.
Maharaj, I have a question. It's echoing.
Can you repeat once more?
Yes. My question is about the metaphor Acharya uses.
Oh, the question that staircase metaphor.
No. The cloth, the wood.
Oh yeah. Should I explain once more? Okay, I shall explain. Now, in fact, these two metaphors. One, sutre maniganaiva. One is a thread in which jewels are joined together, strung together to form a garland of jewels. One. The other one is this Shankaracharya's commentary. This is not in the verse of Bhashya commentary. Shankaracharya says, actually, he says, Okay. Now, what he says is, I shall read out. So you can also read if you want. It comes in the commentary on the 7th verse. Shankaracharya says, in the commentary he says, Dirghatantushu padavar sutrecha manigana iva. So, he brings an additional metaphor. Long thread. The long thread which constitute a cloth. Now, there is complete identity and unity and oneness between the long threads and the cloth. They are totally inseparable. You remove all the threads and then you don't get the cloth. So that is one. That is one example. which Shankaracharya brings in. His purpose is to emphasize the Advaitic meaning of this particular verse. And there is a reason for it. These verses are technically, literally speaking, they are more inclined towards Visishtadvaita. Because Visishtadvaita says, according to Visishtadvaita, the divine reality is present in all of us. It is called Antaryami, indweller, but not totally identical. See, the thread is something, and then the jewels are different from the thread. So there is a separation. That could be Visishtadvaita. At the same time, there is closeness. So, according to Ramanuja, the thread is like the divine reality. It is present, immanent. It is the indweller in that garland. Okay. The Shankaracharya says, this metaphor should be taken like the other metaphor which he introduces. What is the metaphor? Cloth and threads. Because the cloth and thread metaphor is literally different from, pure in so many words, if you literally analyze, it's different from the jewels and thread metaphor. Actually, jewels and thread cannot become one, inseparable. According to Visishtadvaita, according to Ramanuja's philosophy, everything in this world is identical but also different from God. Identical because the divine presence is in everything, but distinct and different because we are not the same thing. But according to Shankaracharya, at the highest analysis, everything is same, totally identical with the reality. So, according to Vivekananda, we are progressing from Dvaita to Visishtadvaita, eventually Advaita. But Shankaracharya says, here the metaphor should be read like the thread cloth metaphor. Is it clear to you?
Yes,
Because he wants to emphasize the Advaita ideal. Because the cloth and thread cannot be separated, but the thread and the jewels pieces can be separated. So if you take it literally, you may be inclined to support Ramanuja. But remember, Ramanuja was born 350 years after Shankaracharya passed away. So you remember. So Shankaracharya had already written all these 350 years before Ramanuja was born. So he did not anticipate Ramanuja, remember that. Ramanuja wrote after Shankaracharya. He was born more than 300 years after Shankaracharya's passing away. So that's it. Clear to you? Eh?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you for the wonderful question answers. It's wonderful. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.